And don't forget, if you're negotiating for something, negotiate for more than what you want. Then you bargain down and you act like you took a loss. When in reality, what they wanted was the convention line of 1818, the 49th parallel to the sea. So ask for more than you want. Then when you bargain down, heck, you might get what you want for more than you want. Don't ask for less than you want, because then you'll get a lot less than what you want. Write that down. That's bargaining 101. So, Clay, what was the Liberty Party? They believed in what?
Abolition.
Yes, abolitionist, anti-slavery party, but they actually took from both parties. And what battle ended the? Oh no. Who signed the Texas annexation? Yeah, Tyler jumped the gun, even though it's going to be Polk. Tyler got it. And so, California is the issue. Mexico was furious. Santa Anna, he was ousted from power because the United States annexed Texas and fled to Havana. And so, we're leading up to the Mexican-American War. At the time they called it the Mexican War, but more and more they say the Mexican-American War because there's going to be another war Mexico's going to have. And the thing about this is whenever they have two countries for war, Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, the Franco-Prussian War, the Austro-Prussian War, the Danish-Prussian War, the winner comes second. So the loser, got that? The loser is first. Right? Everyone got that? So let me throw something out. Let's say you're having like a state that has like 2 colleges, and they play a game. Maybe this Saturday. It is correctly called, like in Montana, it would be the Cat Grizz game. Does that make sense?
You're funny.
Correct.
Not
as you have, yes. And so, and Mr. Carter, for example, when he used to teach here, I used to remind him every year we go to this, and I go, by the way, Mr. Carter, remember Cat Grizz? Okay. Keep playing. Okay, so before we get to that, we actually try to buy Mexico or California. John Slidell, who would become a famous Confederate politician, and the Trent Affair. I know you're all thinking the Trent Affair. Well, Slidell, and by the way, now look, it's like, where do you put your hands? I don't know where. Here. All right. But he was sent down to Mexico City to try to bargain for the Rio Grande as the border. U.S. claims are U.S. claims, citizens' claims against the Mexican government of about $3.5 million. Thank you. Okay. Tickets. So, American citizens claim Mexico the Mexican government owed them this money. We said, we'll just pay that money back and buy New Mexico and California. Now, New Mexico in 1846, look at this map right here. That's New Mexico. Wow, it was huge. And obviously California. Well, how do you suppose the Mexican government responded to Slidell?
They're trying to kill us.
Not quite, but they totally ignored him. They refused to even listen to him. They were so mad about the annexation of Texas. So Slidell went back. And the reason we're mentioning this is that those are the goals of Polk. But he can't get them now without what? And what he's hoping for is a quick war, some kind of excuse to defeat the Mexicans in one battle, and they'll be so humiliated they'll give the United States California. That's basic, or agree to sell it. And so he began to engineer 2 strategies. The first one, actually the other one happened started first, but this one resolved quicker, was, okay, here are the borders. The Rio Grande's what the United States and Texas claim. And look at this, goes all the way up into Colorado. So you can see why the United States wanted this. That means 2/3 more land the United States claimed. Mexico claimed the Nueces River. Now, as you can see, it's a smaller river. That means Texas is that much smaller. Therefore, Mexico gets a lot more land. So that is the border issue. And so you have 2 different border claims. And what Polk did is, he said, now the U.S. has a tiny army. The U.S. was anti-militaristic up until after World War II. We're now 180 degrees from that. But Zachary Taylor and this tiny little army had less than 2,000 men. They marched to the mouth of the Rio Grande and began to aggressively patrol around there. Cavalry and dragoons. Now Taylor, what were they hoping would happen? Yeah, Mexico would defend their territory. Excuse for war. Quick victory, Mexico quit. That's what they thought. So they're trying to provoke a war. Or just make Mexico back down and be humiliated and sign away California. The ironic thing, Taylor was a Whig. Polk was a Democrat. Taylor didn't want to do this. He was opposed to it, but followed the order. This will come back in a way to haunt the Democrats. And the other thing about Taylor is, well, first off, we should say that unfortunate bubble. Oh, Lori should get that checked quickly. And unlike other generals, Taylor was an old frontier fighter, hero of War of 1812. The men really respected him. And in fact, he was a lot different than a lot of generals. In fact, that he didn't care so much about their uniforms. He didn't have that shiny brass buckles and everything pressed and exactly correct. All he cared about is if you followed orders and fought. In fact, in battle, he would wear a red flannel shirt and a straw hat. That was his basic outfit, which is kind of humorous. And so, remember, Andrew Jackson was old, can't be old, it's old Hickory. William Henry Harrison was old Tippecanoe. Yes. Close. Old Rough and Ready. Okay, I know it sounds kind of goofy, but that name, doesn't it kind of more sound like those that kind of frontiersmen that both sides are trying to cultivate? Rough and Ready. Well, we'll come back to this. As he marched south and began to aggressively patrol, it finally happened. It's called the Thornton Affair. When dragoons under, well, where are we at here? Under Captain Philip Thornton were attacked by Mexican soldiers and American soldiers died. April 25th, 1846. Anybody know what a dragoon is? A small Union soldier? Small unit. Not quite. Yeah. Dragoon is actually the name of the actual kind of soldier. They were attacked by Mexicans. A dragoon, this might shock you, is not a fire-breathing dragon or fire-breathing lizard. We kept those in reserve. Okay, cavalry. Okay, you know cavalry, they ride horses. There are actually 3 different types of cavalry at that time. They had heavy cavalry, which still had the 14-foot lance. They still use those. Those had some problems, but also nobody likes to stand in front of somebody riding at you with a 14-foot lance. Light cavalry, mostly sword. Dragoons were more like mounted infantry. They would ride and they would get off the horse and fight dismounted. So they were light, like basically mounted infantry. They might have a sword, but the big one was fighting with a cut-off rifle called a carbine. So those are actually dragoons during the Mexican War, but not the Thornton men. So it got back that they were attacked north of the Rio Grande, and President Polk announced to Congress, American soldiers, unprovoked, were attacked on American soil. I guarantee it, American soil by Mexicans, and that would be the excuse for Congress to vote, not overwhelmingly, but vote for a declaration of war. Northern Whigs, and do get this down, Northern Whigs did vote against this. This war would be very divisive, as virtually all wars are. This was a war of choice. And so, right? No problem? Guess we're painting right over it. When you're done, everyone just take a quick roll against that edge. So you can take a little piece of this hallway wherever you go. So, wait a second. Is there a problem? No.
Are you talking about the lesson?
You're talking about the pain.
Oh, the paints are pretty good job. Where were they attacked? Were they?
You know.
Were they? Where were they? To this day, it is unclear if they were north of the Rio Grande or south of the Rio Grande. To this day, we don't know. We do know for a fact that American cavalry did cross the Rio Grande. The Rio Grande is about knee-high. I was thinking of a big river, you know, Rio Grande, it must be a massive river, it's the border. No, it's a very shallow, yeah, like a big creek. That is the color, the beautiful color of root beer. And so, and they know, we know they crossed. So, what did Polk do? Listen, what did Polk do? He what? That's it. Polk said they were attacked north of the Rio Grande. Did he know that?
That was another bad one.
What did Polk do? He lied. He lied. American soldiers were attacked, but he did not know where. And it kind of throws everything out if they were attacked south of the Rio Grande. He lied. And they knew it right away. It's going to be debated right away. He lied about that. And that is why there's going to be a bunch of Whigs elected in the North against the war in 1846. So war is declared in end of April. That election in November, a lot of Northern Whigs, including one Abraham Lincoln, who would stand up as a backbencher, so a junior congressman, a Whig from Illinois. And by the way, doesn't he just look so young? And it's just
He doesn't have his hat, really. It's weird.
no, he didn't grow the beard until right after the election in 60.
Well, we had Marshall syndrome, so it's like really skinny and tall.
Maybe, but probably. Yeah, and like really long limbs. I think like he's and really strong. But that's another story for later on. But he stood up and wanted a vote, what he called the spot resolution. Show me the spot where American blood was shed. He wanted a vote in Congress to force the United States to show exactly where the Thornton Affair happened. Now, it did not pass. And Lincoln, who was opposed to the war, would end up kind of being for it, because he'd vote for the appropriations for it. But this would give him a little bit of notoriety within the Whig Party. But in 1848, after the war was over, he was kind of swept out of office with a lot of other Whigs, because they were opposed to the war. And so that would be Lincoln's first real attempt at, or the first real national notoriety, which wouldn't last long. He'd be a dark horse in 1860. But let's go back to this. This was put up, this monument, on a spot north of the Rio Grande by the state of Texas about 30 years after the Civil War. And it says, there, the spot where American blood was shed. And by the way, this has nothing to do with the Mexican-American War. Why did they say the spot where American blood was shed? What do they? They hate Lincoln. This is about the Civil War, and they haven't forgiven Lincoln. And so this is a slap in the face to Abraham Lincoln. Take this. Even though he had been dead too for 30 years, but they hadn't forgotten. And if you know anything about the South, they still think the war is going on in many places there. As I just heard somebody actually about a month and a half ago, talk about how Lincoln was such an evil man for attacking the South during the Civil War. Which, by the way, that's not history.
Wait, like you heard that?
Yeah.
Like who?
Oh, it was about the issue of the Confederate monuments that were all put up in the 20th century, which is another story for later on. But they were talking about that. But, and don't let me forget, I will tell you about $5 bills. Don't let me forget that. Which of course you will forget, and I probably will too. But just imagine I was going to tell you that story.
Don't worry.
So, the U.S. declared war. Oh, wait a minute. We lied to get into war to conquer territory?
I wonder
I wonder if this will ever happen again.
No.
Anyone ever heard of the Maine? A battleship that blew up mysteriously in Havana Harbor in 1898, and the U.S. would claim the Spanish did it, and that would lead to the Spanish-American War, which we would conquer Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Did the Spanish blow it up?
We don't know.
We're actually not 100% sure, except we know that the Spaniards were not crazy enough to do that. Could this have happened again?
I don't know.
How do you think we got into Vietnam? To get into the Civil War and stop Vietnam, we claimed that North Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked American destroyers and was held the Tonkin Gulf incident. And that's what would be used for the excuse to go into war. Did that happen? No, it didn't happen. Could there be another one? This is going to set a really bad precedent, isn't it?
Oh, wait.
Could it happen in your lifetime? In 2003, President Bush said that he knew for a fact that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and that would be the reason to invade Iraq. Not only did they not have the weapons, he didn't know that. He might have believed it, but he didn't know that. And we're still there. Thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis have died. This is what we call a bad precedent. So you think these happen. There's a history behind it. People kind of forget this. In fact, I remember people mentioning, God, just like Mexico, most people have no idea. So, then the earthquake hit. He had two plans. The other one was, what, Bear Flag Republic? What's that one? Beautiful California.
There are bears in California. Yeah.
Used to be a lot of bears. There's still grizzly bears there.
Not anymore.
But, yeah, just have you been to San Francisco?
No, I haven't.
The Bear Flag Republic. What happened is this. Remember how Texas revolted and then asked for annexation? The United States would help California revolt and then ask for annexation. Now, they actually planned this before what happened with the Thornton Affair, but as you see, the revolt happened after the Thornton Affair because in 1846, they didn't know. And so, U.S. immigrants to California and Mexican citizens revolted against the Mexican government there. June 14th, Sonoma, California. And go to Sonoma, they had a lot of stuff there. It's a really neat place, but that's where those horrible fires happened about a month ago. It was all around where they tried to declare independence. Beautiful area. John C. Fremont. Fremont was known as a pathfinder. He was a U.S. Army officer who led a number of expeditions, pathfinder, great paths. Well, he led an expedition into Mexico, California, and just happened to arrive in Sonoma weeks before the revolt. Kind of weird, isn't it? I'm sure it's just a coincidence. And then he joined the rebellion with the few U.S. soldiers he had. And then a U.S. naval squadron arrived off of San Francisco just before the revolt, and it too helped with the rebellion. Do you get the point here?
Yeah.
And by the way, the Commodore of the U.S. fleet's name was Stockton. Stockton, California, be named after him. Could be Fremont, California. Fremont declared independence, even though the Mexicans still held Southern California. This is the first flag of California. And imagine kind of a tan piece of canvas, and then some red paint here, red star, red bear. That looks vaguely like a land tapir or something. But we haven't actually seen this flag. That's a picture of it. In 1906, it was in a display in the library in San Francisco. And that's when they had that horrible earthquake, and much of San Francisco burned down, including the original flag. Which is, it's sad they lost it out along with, San Francisco was pretty much destroyed because of that. And they revolted, asked to be annexed, but we have to fight the rest of the war. Now, the U.S. would send a small, kind of very basic small cavalry operation to try to claim this area here of New Mexico, but the biggies Taylor down here. Taylor crossed over the river, and they fought one battle called Palo Alto. And Palo Alto, a U.S. victory, and the assumption was U.S. would win and Mexico would just say, just take it. But what did Mexico say? We're not going to quit. And so then it said, I guess we're going to fight a big battle. And they started to call for volunteers because their army was so small. And what section of the country did most of the volunteers for the Mexican War come from?
South.
Huh? California?
So,
There were very few people there.
so,
California, I like that. So many volunteers came from Tennessee during this war. That's why, to this day, it's known as a volunteer state. That's where that term comes from. And think about all these raw recruits, but the United States had one huge advantage over the Mexicans that would be decisive. Copying the French, what was created at the Fort of West Point a little over 20 years before this war. What's at West Point now?
military school.
The U.S. military academy. We had trained officers. We had relatively professional officers. Now, professional officers doesn't mean they're necessarily good, smart. I mean, yeah, but the men trusted them. In Mexico, the officers were, they bought their commission, they were corrupt, the men didn't trust them. The U.S. had trained officers, and that's going to be such a big deal for Western armies, European armies too. Also, Japan will take advantage of this going into the 20th century. Professional officers. We'll see the same thing when we, as you know, Iraq before. The Iraqi officers were not as professional as American officers. Makes a big difference. And back then, the only degree you got at West Point, in fact, it would be till relatively recently, was engineering.
Engineering.
Think about for soldiers. Build forts, roads, supply, and also you have to be able to aim cannon. Doesn't it make sense?
No.
So I have a friend who graduated there. In fact, I looked at going, but they don't. Don't blow your knee out when you're 15. Write that down. And if you have, I feel your pain. But back even when I went, I had a friend who graduated from West Point, and it was in history. But his degree is a Bachelor of Science in Engineering with an emphasis in history. Isn't that kind of funny? So, anyway, they have sent these men to go down there. Oh, think about all these young West Point graduates. Won't this be a training ground for something in about, let's say, let me throw a year out there, 15 years later?
Maybe.
All the young officers here will be experienced officers in the Civil War. Almost all of them would fight there. So, we're coming up to 3 months later, the Battle of Monterrey. Monterrey is in northern part of Mexico, beautiful part of Mexico. Remember the lithographs? They talked about Andrew Jackson and showing them. By this time, they were a big deal. And they couldn't print these out. They couldn't watercolor them in. And people would get these and they would decorate their walls with them and things like that. Now, I'm not saying I wouldn't necessarily want this for my wall, but wall decorations were so new with the Industrial Revolution. That's pretty cool. It's colorful. No one had anything on their walls, at least for the most part. Well, the battle, both sides were even, but with better officers, better artillery. Zachary Taylor's forces won a big victory. I can't go through all the details of the battle, but Taylor's going to become a big hero. I mean, think about it for a second. He marched across, beat the Mexicans in two battles, and looked like he won the war. But the problem is this. First off, the Mexicans aren't going to quit. And secondly, look at Polk. Polk's sitting there going, he just won a big victory. I vow not to run again in 1848. Doesn't look like who will be the next president. Oh, rough and ready. And Taylor's a Whig. So two things happen. First off, if the Mexicans are going to stay fighting, Polk doesn't want Taylor to be a hero. So as Taylor's up here, they took away Taylor's best soldiers and officers and just left them with raw recruits. They're going to plan to attack Mexico City. Secondly, remember Santa Anna? He's in Havana. Maybe this one. Get my mouse right. But he sends word back after Monterrey on a fast steamboat to Washington, D.C., saying, you help me get back to Mexico, I'll overthrow the government and give you California. And Polk said, what the heck, right? So the U.S. gave him money and a ship to take him and all his almost 1,000 wooden legs back to Mexico. He arrived as like a conquering hero, the liberator at Veracruz. And then at 7,000 feet up to Mexico City, went up the mountains, and every little village he's met as a hero. He marched in and the government collapsed. He took command as president, aka dictator of Mexico, and immediately announced he's going to do what? Drive the United States out of Texas and retake it all.
Yep.
That's what we call a mistake. And Santa Anna's confident. And he begins to organize his force, every man he could find, to destroy Taylor, just as Taylor lost his best man. And we're coming to a battle that if the Mexicans could have won this battle, it would have changed the entire course of our history. And they came very, very close. The battle is Buena Vista. Now we're going to 1847. What does Buena Vista mean? Yeah, it's basically what it means. I get, high mountains there. I guess it is beautiful. I've never been to that part of northern Mexico. Huh? There's some stuff there now. It's really sad. Been to the Yucatan, but I've not been here. I like mine. But this battle, for the first couple days, the first day, the Mexicans almost overwhelmed the Americans. They pushed them back, and basically all Taylor could do was hold. But as this lithograph, which is kind of amusing, but also very shockingly brutal, the U.S., with their experienced officers, a cannon turned the tide. Okay, what do we call that? We have about 12 balls in a cannon, fire. Well, a new invention from Europe like that called canister. Imagine a steel can, cylinder about this big, this long, full of between 250 and 350 musket balls. You fire that out of a cannon, and what happens? Not only the balls, but the pieces of metal from the can would make horrible wounds of the soon called, even know what they call those pieces of the shell? Yeah, named after a British officer named Shrapnel. There's actually a guy named Shrapnel. Not that name. No, it's going to be breathing voice.
What were the things called?
Canister. Yeah. And the Mexicans kept charging and charging. Basically, their only thing was just try to overwhelm the Americans. And they were saying they were shooting canister at 10 paces away. The Mexicans were that close. I mean, me to the wall. Can you imagine what that did to bodies?
Oh, no.
There weren't bodies anymore.
And see how gruesome this is? Yeah. You see that guy?
Oh, no, the guy just above him is
Oh, that's where the head's falling off.
Yeah.
That, no head. That's really gruesome, to be honest with you. I've used this picture for a couple years. I didn't notice till today the headless guy.
Wait, there's another headless guy in the corner. The other corner. On the bottom.
No, he's got his head in front.
No, the guy. But it's
Oh my goodness, that's no head either. Ah! That is really gruesome. Well, anyways.
His body and his arms bent backwards. That's so bad.
Where?
Underneath the guy, the first guy you played with.
Oh, right here?
No, over. The first guy you had, the Mexican no head.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
His head's there.
His arms bent.
It's bent the wrong direction.
Okay, really fast. Taylor won even a bigger victory. Anybody want to guess the next president?
Henry Clay.
Yeah. Yeah. This would propel. Polk's plan backfired, and old Rough and Ready will be the leading candidate for 1848. But what about Mexico City? The American plan was now, if we can't win a big victory right away, which everybody always thinks in every war will happen, if we can take Mexico City, force them to surrender, or force them to sign a treaty, we'll get California, New Mexico. Now, this is a really risky operation, but probably one of the most famous generals, one of the most successful in American history. Another hero of 1812, Winfield Scott. Scott, very competent, very smart. Now, he too was a Whig. But Polk chose him because, unlike Rough and Ready, he didn't have that Andrew Jackson appeal. He was what they call a martinet. He was somebody who cared only about discipline and make sure the men looked perfect and marched perfect, which you could argue might be necessary for an army, but Taylor didn't care about that. So the men didn't idolize Winfield Scott. Anybody want to guess his nickname? Gotta have all, right? Old Fuss and Feathers. Needless to say, Fuss and Feathers doesn't have the same cachet as Rough and Ready.
I get why they call him Fuss and Feathers, because his hair.
Actually, Fuss and Feathers was because he's like a fussy about looks, and it was actually referred to peacocks. You know, cared only about how they look. And so his plan was, and nobody thought he could do it. You know, we look back today, and the relative strength of the United States compared to Mexico, you think, well, Mexico, you know, they just don't have the power or the size. But in 1847, it's not that clear. It was much closer, and Mexico very well could have won. And if they could have stopped Scott, once again, this could have changed our entire course of history. I mean, this really is a big deal. And so they had to land here at Veracruz and then get out of Veracruz. Because what disease?
Malaria.
Malaria is a problem, but even a bigger one that hit the summer. Yellow fever. And what spread? We know now, but they didn't know then. Mosquitoes. They had to get out of there. So abandon their supply lines. Then 10,000 men going through mountain passes and through valleys, which could easily ambush and cut off, go up 7,000 feet and capture a defended city surrounded by forts. Most observers thought Scott could not do it. And there were a couple battles where they were nearly stopped. And once again, who knows? The most famous of these, we're going to jump right to the Battle of Chapultepec. And the Battle of Chapultepec, this old Aztec temple, when the Spanish raised everything, and they put up a fort there. And this fort commanded the entryway into Mexico City. And if they could hold that, the U.S. could not take Mexico City. And so Chapultepec would be not only this crucial battle, whether or not the U.S. would win or change our history, but also, you're welcome, another name. Chapultepec. I mean, think about it. Chapultepec, where's your sister Frelinghuysen? And then there's with Ticonderoga. I am here to help. And Chapultepec would shorten that to Chapultepec.
Yeah.
Isn't that a great name? And see, you're not going to be typecast. Chapultepec and Frelinghuysen. Get that down. And if you have twins, Chapultepec 1 and Chapultepec 2. Okay. Now, all these people who were at the Civil War, oh, I almost forgot somebody. At Buena Vista and Monterey, one of the few trained officers out there at both battles, most of them got sent away for Buena Vista, was Zachary Taylor's son-in-law. That's why he stayed. He was a West Point graduate, become a very prominent politician after the war. And one of the most famous traders in American history. Jefferson Davis was Zachary Taylor's son-in-law. He becomes the president of the Confederacy. At this battle, there's going to be famous Civil War generals like George McClellan, Thomas Jackson. There's a guy named Ulysses S. Grant was there. You might have heard of him. Also, this young captain, West Point graduate, whose father actually proposed independence back in 1776 in the Continental Congress. He, on his hands and knees, crawled around the Mexican left flank and found a hole in the line that they attacked on the 13th and took the fort and won the battle. And that was Robert E. Lee. Maybe the most famous trader besides Benedict Arnold in American history. Now, so I can say that here in the South, I'd be like run out of town. But, and I filmed that. But, Chapultepec. So they were all there, yeah.
Who is his father?
Light Horse Henry Lee. So, Scott entered Mexico City in September 1947. It took about 100 years. Long after, 2 years after World War II ended. He entered in 1847, and here's the problem. You think, yay, we conquered Mexico. Not a chance. Sure, they marched into Mexico City, but Santa Anna fled, and they're now surrounded by hundreds of thousands of hostile civilians who hate them. They only have a tiny little bit of Mexico, and most of the country is not conquered. They're out of supplies. They can't stay long. They're actually, in a way, trapped in Mexico City. If you know anything about Napoleon in Moscow, you'll know what I'm talking about. Sure, they took it, but what did they win? And so they got to get a treaty now. The funny thing is, when Polk heard about this, he immediately sent orders for the United States to take the whole country.
How are they going to do that?
Yes.
Like the whole
Couldn't have done it.
Mexico.
Now, the thing is that Southern advisors convinced them what a good deal it was, because they're thinking, what can they make out of Mexico?
Slave states.
About 20 slave states. Yeah,
30.
yeah, maybe. Mex was huge. That's what they're thinking. And so, fortunately for everybody involved, that did not happen that way. But Santa Anna is riding on top. He wasn't going to quit. The problem is Santa Anna's Santa Anna. He couldn't resist bringing all his stuff with him. And so he had over 100 wagons in a long train with all his personal items. He had rugs and wine and painting and money and clothes and at least 4 wagons full of nothing but artificial legs. And this long wagon train snaked north. He stayed with it. If he would have rode out ahead, he probably could have escaped capture, but dragoons captured. And that's how Santa Anna was captured. Now, one thing about that, can you imagine what happened when they found all this stuff? Yeah, the wine was quickly liberated, along with everything else. They just went nuts, stealing and taking everything. And I always think about, it must have been so cool when they opened the wagons, like, what the heck are these? Run around legs. And yes, they did have a version of baseball. The rules were similar, no walks yet, and a few other things, but they used it as legs as bats. And they're playing all these games, but Santa Anna didn't just have like peg legs. He had specially made carved legs. He had an ivory leg, which is unimaginably valuable. He also had legs that were diamond encrusted, gold plated, one solid gold, one solid silver leg, which had to be way too heavy to be able to move. He supposedly also had a leg that was a cannon, which is ironic, but. And I'm still, yeah, like, bang! It wasn't just knock him down. Think how they recall with first the old stuff. My favorite one is supposedly he had a sword that you take off part of the leg. It was a sword. I would never. And the best part is, what happens to that first step he takes? Right down. Yeah.
It's like in the really Wild Wild West, it's a shoe that has the knife at the end of it. It's
I've not seen that, but that sounds like a that comes from a Jane Bond movie. So, what do you think is supposed to happen to the gold and the diamond encrusted legs?
I think all those have
Gone, right? They quickly disappeared, right?
I never saw.
Imagine someone carrying it.
They're here. Everyone, act busy. Yeah, we got a little. I don't have much here today. You're back in the room. It's gonna be tough.
They knock.
So, yeah. Well, somebody spirited a bunch of those wooden legs back to the United States. And now think about it. After the war, they want to make souvenirs. And the most valuable souvenirs they carefully carved out of the legs. So it has to be something relatively small. What could you carve out of the legs? You can sell a lot of cross. Good guess, but no. I like that. Toothpicks. Santa Anna toothpicks became the rage, and soon there were millions of them. But let me tell you about Santa Anna toothpicks. Toothpicks at this time were not the thin little, tooth you used once to throw away. Imagine like a wooden pencil, like for example, you have a wooden pencil about half that diameter, and then you would, it'd be reusable. So you'd use it and then carve another sharp edge and use it again. I know that sounds gross, but then again, it's kind of logical, isn't it? There's a Santa Anna toothpick at the museum, the Smithsonian Museum of American History. And if you pay $5, you can use it. No, wouldn't that just be horrifically gross? But let me finish up the real fast then. Santa Anna delayed, but he finally agreed to sign the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Nicholas Tritz ignored Polk and just got the original goals, which was the right thing to do. And that is the treaty. Remember the glass negative? Well, two things about this. First off, it clearly broke. I think that's kind of cool. See where the negative broke, so they still made the picture out of it. And something's wrong with the eyes. He looks a little bit.
Oh.
It's probably not great.
So the U.S. got the Rio Grande and the southern border. Next, the Mexican cession, California and New Mexico. But then to not make it look like a war for conquest, we paid over 18 million, 15 million, and then we repaid U.S. debt holders of 3.3. So we forgave Mexico $3.3 million they owe. Now, why did we do that? To make it look like we weren't fighting a war of conquest. To make it look like we just wanted the Rio Grande, and then after the war, we just happened to buy California and New Mexico. Now, of course, that's garbage. The whole thing was war of conquest, and this was an outright theft. Especially when in 2 months of signing the treaty, gold was discovered. And I mean, it's just not even close. And that is why a few years later, let me put this up really quick. See this piece of land right here? The last little piece of the continental United States. Let me go right here. It's called the Gadsden Purchase. In 1853, the United States purchased this piece of land for $10 million. This hunk of the desert.
How much money was it?
$10 million. We overpaid, partially out of guilt, for the $15 million for stealing California and Mexico. New Mexico. But that's coming a lot later. And that one, Russia just didn't want it anymore. But the reason why we bought this piece is there's more mountains here, and this was flat for railroad. Even that will lead to some wars with the Apaches, but that's another story. And two things about this. First off, what happened to Santa Anna? He died. Wait, eventually. Ran out of race. He actually remained as dictator for a while, being in and out of power. And finally, he got into exile, out of exile. He's still a national hero in Mexico. Partially because for standing up to the United States. Because the United States is going to be, especially in the 20th century, look like a pretty big bully. We'll get to it called basic diplomacy. So he's looked like a hero, even though I know there's a good and bad there. But he would be in New York City during the Civil War. And anybody know what he would introduce to the United States? Something he got, actually something that American Indians did in Mesoamerican Indians did in Mexico. Chewing gum. If anybody likes chewing gum, Santa Anna brought that to the United States. There we go. You can thank Santa Anna. And because if you can't brush your teeth, good stuff. And one more thing, last thing for today. Just write down the Wilmot Proviso. Done! I'll tell you that later. We'll get to Charles. It's a good story, too. It's a personal story. It's personal. Don't worry about writing it. Just write Wilmot Proviso. We're not going to write this whole thing down. We'll start right here. Then we'll do slavery, read a document, have a quiz. We should have croissants. Who's with me? Who wants a croissant day? Hey, tomorrow, Friday, bring croissants. What country do croissants come from?
America.
Austria. Okay, that did not sound good. Now you're going to go to the library. Library. Go to the library, people. Yeah.
When I was little, we like down and I got like a little union hat order, and I thought it was so cute.
Yeah.
So I wore it all through like the deep south, and everybody was like these old schoolers that they called me like Nat's hat, and like really
And that wasn't a compliment.
I had no idea what they were doing. So I was like, wait.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fun.
Yeah.
I believe it 100%.
My parents were like,
You know it. Just go. Just keep walking. But everyone's so polite and nice there too. It's the funniest thing, and there's an edge to it.
yeah.
How old were you?
I was like 8.
Oh, so you're just having fun.
Yeah.
So you said that the countries basically paid the war to get land.
Mhm.
That happened with the Germany most attacking those ships to start World War I.
To get the U.S. involved in World War I? You know, that really did happen. But you can make the argument that, but the thing about the similarity is, the U.S. didn't have to go to war. And we voted to still, it was voluntary war, but they were sinking ships, but there were other reasons that they hit. And we'll get to it. It's banks.
Banks?
Yeah, and I'll explain.
About every war we've been. It's pretty much.
Well, yeah, except for World War II, in a way, for the most part.
Yeah.
Because
They were
But you think-
attacking our
colonies.
colonies and the city.
But Germany declared war on the U.S.
Right, yeah.
And so then, you know,
You don't turn down the option.
we can't turn it down. Someone declares war, you declare, we're going to the library, people. We're going to the library, because Emma was going to do a presentation, but she's actually going to turn her paper. She's going to do a presentation Monday, so we're doing so.
So, tomorrow we have that quiz.
Yes.
And then Thursday, we're reading 599 to 626.
You just like close.
Yeah, and then, are you going to be gone? What are you going to be gone? Or will you be back?
I'll be back on it.
So just, there'll be a couple things I'm gonna give you. I'm gonna give you a little short story and some documents to read. And we're not gonna quite do the DBQ. But the only problem is, you got a couple.
I have 2 others.
Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. I had someone else on my phone. I remember. And we're gonna read these documents, and don't worry about writing the essay yet. We're just gonna go through them. I want you to read them and kind of think about who wrote them, why they wrote them, that kind of thing. It's a good little exercise, and then you can take it now if you want, but DB3, yeah. But it's different. They change it every year. Oh, I gotta go to the library.
And then what's the horseman?
Horseman in the Sky. I'm just writing it down so I don't forget. It's going to be a little short story I'm going to give, and I think I'm going to give that. It's a cool little, about 4-page short story about the Civil War, and it really is one of those like, it's just a great story. I know you will like it. I know.
I heard you don't talk a lot about World War II.
I do, and I don't know. It's really hard to talk about it, so there's always time limitations. So I talk about the main elements of it.
you a communist? Well, wait for the history.
Lord is so.
Two, justification. Jealousy and murder. Stanford White, New York City's leading architect, shot to death by a millionaire playboy. Caught in the middle, the beautiful Evelyn Nesbit.
Argued over subjects in 19th century society. Spiritualists said that ghosts of the dead walk among us and watch over us. Occasionally, in the presence of